The bubble, the dream. This is my disclaimer. Any correlation to reality is simply a coincidence. My books are fiction. The bubble, the dream, Chapter 1. Technology has really become a fast-moving change of reality. When I was a kid, almost everyone lived on a continent. That caused some conflict with differing religions, sexual orientations, politics, and race. As the world became more global, people tried to be more inclusive. They tried diversity training, laws, and do-good forms of meeting people unlike themselves. But in the end, we all realized that people would find a reason to dislike other people, no matter what was done. A new company had formed that made large bubbles that floated on the ocean, able to hold about 3,000 people. At first, the bubbles were used like cruise ships. People would go to a particular type of bubble for amusement. Certain dirty dealers would purchase a bubble for nefarious reasons. Out in the Indian and Pacific Ocean, it was anything goes. Name your vice, there was a bubble for that. Casinos, sex clubs, drug dealers, and the like loved these bubbles because they could be in international waters and the laws did not pertain to them. Then religion got into the act. Sects of believers were happy to purchase the bubbles to keep their people away from the sinful ways of others. The religious sects liked to be kept to themselves, but schools were in place so young people between the ages of 5 and 20 could be sent to the continents to live and meet other people, learn skills that they could take back to their bubbles. Religious sects didn't really use these options. 20 years later, the bubbles are still floating. The bubbles were modeled after plant cells and were actually living organisms that monitored and maintained the environment. Grown under strict conditions, it could be formed into whatever shape they wanted, but because they planned to float them on the ocean, they decided to use the bubble shape to be more naturally aesthetic. All parts of the plant cells were used, including creating a habitat that functioned like living structure. The outer laws were made of fatty acids called phospholipids. These phospholipids have both hydrophilic and hydrophobic parts to create a protective barrier for the bubble. There were shafts from which water could travel back and forth between the wall and the outer world. These were only access points to the bubble, and when boarding the bubble or leaving the bubble, one was shot through these shafts in a deluge of water, transporting a pod into the vacuole. Unlike animal cells, plant cells have a cell membrane that is a denser material and adds more structure to the cell. Within this was the cytoskeleton, made of fibers and tubes holding up the cell membrane wall. Cytoplasm, the soup of the interior, floated on the other structures and within the bubble. Food was grown on the rough endoplasmic reticulum with the assistance of ribosomes. These ribosomes were modified to grow a regular crop of food that the human populace recognized. The photosynthetic nature of the bubble allowed food to be created as if the inhabitants were part of the cell itself, and adjusted naturally depending on the number of people within. Computer storage and operations were conducted within the nucleus. As with any cell, this provided a safe and secure operation that could not be tampered with from the outside. All the power generation needed to heat the light the vacuole was generated via the mitochondria, as it was with any regular cell. The living quarters were approximately 80% of the bubble and were all within the vacuole. The company was centralized to America continent, and the OA, or Organized Americas, did license and keep track of the bubbles in a somewhat loose maritime law manner. The development of the bubbles had revolutionized the world. The ability to generate enough power from cellular manipulation to satisfy the needs of everyone. This technology was transmuted to be generating power across the globe, causing a new boom in all aspects of innovation. Each bubble able to produce enough food and water for the inhabitants. To say the world was in awe of this company would be an understatement. Every country in the world wanted their success. The company enjoyed their fame and wanted to look like they were responsible stewards of these floating cities. Each bubble was supposed to check in and test their environments once a year. A plan was in place for the company that manufactured them to have teams ready to dispatch should anything go wrong. The bubbles were required to check in annually for safety, news, and system updates. Occasionally, a bubble would not check in. The administration office didn't get too excited about this, as the bubbles are purchased by eccentric people who do not want to be in contact with the outside world. If a bubble does not check in, which the OA, the company, is notified, and a team is sent out to check on their status. Often when they check on the bubble, it is the particular nature of the people in the bubble that cause the lack of communication. In very rare instances, they do have to board a bubble. Whenever this happens, they find that people have gotten a little strange. Someone has declared themselves to be a god, and others in the bubble either believe this or have gone along with it. The lack of checking in seems to be connected with the leadership roles and the power struggles of ego. Or in really bad situations, the people in the bubble have been found dead due to some disease. Chapter 2, Saints and the Team. I'm a saint. No, really, that's what they call people in my profession. I was conducted via color red to check in the status of the bubble, the dream. Boarded if necessary. Last known contact 13 years. I had heard of tales of contacts where the inhabitants were all dead. This was usually caused by the plant cell getting a disease in a vital system. Opening and entering those shaft portals must have been eerie, but that hadn't happened in years. Another time I heard of a bubble that had been declared one of the participants God, and everyone in the bubble believed it. Any time I have ever entered a bubble, a new experience occurred. Xenophobia was a big problem, and a saint was likely to be killed if they weren't able to convey their intentions before they entered. Procedures were in place, and everyone who boarded the bubble knew these procedures, like life jacket training on a cruise ship. A supply list and a team of people were assembled. Supplies for a month were estimated on how many people they believed to be on the bubble. Plenty of food, water, clothing, and news of the current world would accompany the team. There was no expense spared in the rescue of a bubble. The company that made the bubbles was very lucrative, as it gave the voice of the world a place to be. The company desired to stay in the good graces of the OA and the international community, so the public image always showed them to genuinely care for the people on board their product. It was believed that the ability to form self-sustaining cell would eventually lead to the colonization of the universe. Each team consisted of 20 persons. Team leader, the saint, medical, engineering, and sanitation. Each saint's team is scheduled to stay on the bubble for 30 days. This is to check for false health reports that are flashed at the door to discourage infiltration and knowing what's really going on. It's time that I prepare myself for anything. We proceed to the bubble, closely followed by the protocol that is expected, dressed in hazmat suits to protect us from whatever we find. We flash colors and shoot an empty pod into the vacuole to show our intent to board. We try everything we can to make contact before we enter the bubble. We've tried contacting them via many channels, and I've had no success. The electronic communication or conveyance has produced a response, and we would have to enter the bubble. And we would have to do it without the insistence of the people inside. When we did enter, I expected the worst. Maybe everyone was dead. Is that what we would have waiting for us as I opened the pod into the vacuole? We barely enter the pod, not knowing what we will be getting into. Everyone is anxious. I have never had to do this before. It's been 13 years since anyone has had contact with these people, and the mess I'm imagining is not good. Can't we just think the thing, sink it, and be done with it? The bubble, the dream. When I entered the bubble, much to my surprise, the welcoming committee is waiting for us. Per the protocol, everyone, including my team, is wearing a light hazmat suit. This was a procedure that was organized by the company selling the bubbles in case a disease had entered and the inhabitants can't assist us. It was all a choreographed dance. Everyone was doing as the protocol directed. This was a way of easing the fear of the group of people that had not been in contact with the outside world for a while. Everyone in our team knows exactly what they are to do. This dance establishes trust and reveals if the inhabitants can do the opening protocol, testing their health and abilities. Chapter 4. Not everything is as it seems. We enter, and everyone seems fine. The administrator is average. His brown hair and eyes do not lead anyone to believe that anything interesting could happen around him. His voice is soft, but not too soft. We're shown to our quarters as the ship we came in is on unload to the appropriate areas. It's evening by now, and we are all feeling a bit better about our encounter. I let out a sigh. Everything seems fine. I contact headquarters and let them know that we are on board. We don't see any wide-eyed zombies anywhere. The persons who are supposed to meet us at the door do so. I'm relaxed, and I think how strange that they haven't commuted us with the outside world for so long. Next morning, I go to the administration area to check the communications and see if I can find an issue. Why didn't they respond? I could clearly see they were getting requests for contact. They were a religious sect, but didn't seem to be too far from reality. No strange gestures, no wailing, no strange devotion to a single person. All the protocol was followed except the response to boarding the bubble. If there was some mechanical reason for the lack of communication, they could have sent up a flare or something. 13 years was a long time for no contact. When I entered, I spoke to the team member in charge of such matters. He told me that everything seemed to be in order, and he could find no reason for the people not to respond to the authorities or us, as it was the custom. With a list of questions, I went to the meeting with the administrator. Was there some reason they stayed out of touch? Did they want to continue to be out of touch with the outer world? It wasn't a long process to do the annual safety check. We could make it as comfortable as possible for them. They all seemed to be aware and able to do the contact. And I was talking to the administrator. I noticed something odd about his face. It seemed to wave or shift for a moment. It's a little hard to describe. It was not something I had seen before. What on earth was that? Our conversation moved to topics of the current news and what was happening in the world. After our meeting, I paused to speak to the doctor. Did you notice anything strange about the people on the Dream? This was the first time I had had a chance to speak to him after boarding. Did I? He said. Every one of them is avoiding me, and they have some sort of skin condition. But without an actual examination, I can't tell you what's going on. Did you notice that there's no medical staff here? The clinic that's been ransacked and the supplies cabinets have been emptied. We are all still suited, so I didn't have any real concerns. I was hoping that the members of my crew would not show carelessness enough to relax and unsuit before we disembarked. Something was going on, and I decided to go back to the ship we came on. The next day, upon entering the lobby, I saw what looked to be a starlings in murmuration near the ceiling. I asked someone how they got the birds in the bubble. They just laughed and walked away. I thought maybe they had some kind of pest control issue. I looked for the sanitation department to ask about what I was seeing. When I got to the Department of Sanitation, I spoke with the person who seemed to be in charge. How did you acquire these birds I see near the ceiling in the central area? Did you raise them here in the bubble? Are you collecting eggs or something? He didn't know what I was talking about. I explained that I was in the lobby and there were these birds flying up by the ceiling. He smiled and said he would take a look, but knew of no birds on board. There was no way he could not have known of these birds. I mean, there were a lot of them. I could clearly see what like to be starlings murmurating in their rhythmic patterns. He suggested I talk to the administrator again, ask him about the birds. So off I go looking for the administrator again. Within the While the administrator and I are chatting, I lead him back toward the lobby and I ask him about the bird situation. As we were talking, a wind came up from nowhere, and these beads or birds or whatever I was seeing swirled about us and formed into a person. Hello. Welcome to the dream. I haven't spoken to any from the outside for some time. I hope you are enjoying your stay. The shock on my face must have been something. I looked in disbelief as the person I was talking to just pixelated and swirled away. I watched as the bits of person moved upward toward the ceiling. I was unprepared for this mentally. What had I just seen? I practically ran to the doctor and blurted out something. I must have been undiscernible as I stumbled over my words, trying to explain what I had just seen. But how could I? I took him by the arm and led him to the main lobby and pointed up, and I said, "Do you see that mass of birds up there? They're people." The doctor, who was a bit more stoic than myself, looked up, then looked back at me and smiled like maybe I had infected or something. Maybe I had taken my suit off, or whatever was affecting the dream was now affecting me. Coming down from the heights, a ribbon of matter formed in front of the doctor and said, "Surprise!" and floated away. "Well, what do you think of that?" I said. "I think you will find me in the lab for the rest of our stay here." I informed the rest of the team that we were dealing with something unknown, that I would like them to stay on the ship and be very careful to stay sterile. The doctor did as he said and stayed in the lab. I asked people from the bubble what they thought happened to cause this affliction. They couldn't really tell me anything, but did say it was affecting everyone within the bubble. The doctor and I got together and drank a good portion of the alcohol that we had brought on board. As this was a religious sect, they really didn't need it anyway. Hey, I'm a saint, not an angel. What in the world caused such mutation and so quickly? Knowing that the bubbles were made of plant cell material, we came up with the idea that the food generated off the ribosomes had somehow changed the RNA after leaving the nucleus. Slowly, as they continued to digest the food, they were changing their own DNA. Slowly, they started to incorporate the chemical composition of a plant cell. This caused the human cells to form a cell membrane and separate from one another, but still continue to have a bond that identified them as one unit no matter how distant the cells had become. Each person became a cloud of cells that flowed in and out of human form, like a cloud of murmuring starlings, and they would form together and perform some tasks like speech and then dance away. They did not seem to be in pain or distressed by this, but flowed smoothly. I had to hope I was with a group of professionals and they would not slip. I sent a text to the corporate office. We were dealing with something on board the Dream, and the team needs to be extremely careful. Chapter 5, Problems. How did they find out what was happening? And when did they decide to stop communicating with the outside world? It was a brave one to be the first to say publicly that something strange was happening to him. It would have to be a very confident person to do so, as most tribes would isolate or kill anyone with an illness that may endanger a tribe. I have a feeling that everyone was changing about the same time, so that the first person to say something was not the first person to have the condition. Nobody was telling us the problem when we arrived. They all have it, and they hope to pull off the 30 days without anyone from our team noticing. Our little friend from the ceiling must have had other ideas. Escape and sealing the bubble. We still didn't know what to think of the people on board, but they did seem to be in distress. They seemed fine, not knowing what had happened to them or how to fix it, or if they should fix it. We conducted a full report of the activities of what we had seen. We informed the people on board that they should stay in contact with the office so we could monitor the situation. We did not feel it would be safe for anyone to have physical contact with the outside. They seemed to understand, however, there was some conflict with the younger people who realized they would never be leaving this bubble. But as we didn't know exactly what had caused their cells to mutate, we could not take any chances. It was unfortunate. It was unfortunate. They were young people. They needed to be schooled. They were in a religious sect. The communication between the continent and the bubbles were restored and updated. I begged the administrator to keep in contact so we could find what had happened, hoping this was not going to affect all the bubbles of the world. While in communication with the corporate office, I tried to explain the situation and what we should do to proceed. The corporate office was professional in that they gave us no advice. I decided to take my team and leave the bubble. I would seal the channel to the outside so they would not be able to leave or nobody would be able to board. It was like sealing them in a tomb buried alive. I had to do it. What would happen if this should be contagious? A dark remembrance of my thought before entering the bubble re-emerged, as I myself wanted to sink the bubble rather than deal with any problems. I started looking at the sky while I was boarding the ship we came on, wondering if they would send a crew to sink us before we could get out of here, if the corporate office considered us too to be contaminated.